Hi, and welcome to Frat Props and Gaming. This is part 2 of the Guyver base tutorial we're working on. Now, when we left off, I was actually coating this in PVA to seal it, so I'll be ready for painting. Now, what I've done is I've drilled the holes in the actual base for where the feet will go, and what those line up with is a couple of plastic rods that I've actually glued into the base of the feet. Alright, now, this one here, I've just glued it to one side of the leg, all the way up, because this whole section here is hollow. So I just glued it to one side with super glue. This one here, because there was a joint here at the ankle, the actual model has it like a barrier there. So I've drilled a hole through there, the same diameter as the tube, put super glue on it, slid it up there. Now that's angled, and this one's more vertical. So when you actually position the model on here, because they're both angled differently to each other, it will actually allow it to grip into better. And just as a test fit, you will see I need to flex the legs slightly to get it in here. But it does slide in and give a fairly well polished appearance. Okay, so what I have to do now is we're just going to take the Guyver back off the top, put him aside. What we're going to do now is just undercoat the base. And once that's done, we'll be ready to start actually painting the additional detail onto this. And then we can look at painting the Guyver figure and attaching them completely together. All right, so all I'm going to do is just undercoat with just basic black acrylic paint. This is just a cheap craft paint I got from my local stationery store, like Officeworks if you're in Australia. I'm not going to be delicate with this at all. I'm not going to try to use a palette and spread it and things like that. All I'm going to do is just apply a quick coat over it, see what sort of coverage I'm getting, and if need be, go over it with a second coat. The main areas we need to cover are all the detail lines, because the deeper the detail, the darker it will be in the final product. Because this will be painted to be like a grey textured rock, so we need to make it match that. All right. As you can see, the undercoat is completely covered on this now. Now I did have to apply 3 coats in the end because the paint wasn't spreading overly well. Now that could have been either because I was using cheap paint, or it could have actually just been that the PVA surface wasn't prepped well enough. Either way, we're ready now to move on to the next step. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to gradually build up the colour on this using dry brushing. We're just going to layer it up. Main colours I'm using is just acrylic grey and the black. I'm going to start off by mixing the grey and the black, just make sort of a darker grey, do a light coat of that, and then build it up, progressively making each coat lighter and lighter, just to sort of pick out just the raised detail in the end. Alright, so I'm going to start first of all just by mixing the paint. So I'm just going to add a little bit of black to start with. You only ever want a little bit. Now, when you're mixing paint, it's always best if you don't put them straight on top of each other. So what I'm doing here is I'm just going to have the grey down here in one point, the black up there in the other. Now what I'm going to do is just start by adding some black to the grey. And we're just going to gradually darken the paint. Add a bit more. I'm getting a good colour, I just need to make sure it's consistent. Now being I'm using acrylic paint normally does dry fairly quickly, but for the amount I'm using here, I should have a decent work time. I'm just going to add a bit more black, because I would like that darker again. I'm going to go pretty much most of it in now because it's just not darkening quite enough for my liking. Now that there looks, that's a lot better. Nice dark grey. All right, now dry brushing. When you dry brush, the concept of it is you're using a brush that has almost no paint left on it. Okay, so you're dabbing most of your paint off. Just trying to keep it on here. Now, what's one of the reasons I work on paper is that, you know, I can just use the paper to wipe more off. Now I'm just going to start with just this edge along here, just to check the paint's right. Now dry brushing, you just do very light strokes over it and gradually pick up the detail. Now what dry brushing does is it floats over the top. It won't go into any deep crevices on there. It catches all the raised edges. If you go a little bit too hard in one area, like I've done here, and you end up with it in there, that's fine, because we can pick that up later. Again, just load the brush again, add it, wipe most of it off. You can also use paper towel or a cloth to wipe your brush on as you're going. Now, because this is the first coat and the darkest, we're going to make sure this is the most liberal. So we still want black to show through, but we do want to cover the majority of it. Now with this painting technique, you do not have to be gentle, you don't have to go slow. As this is sealed foam we're working on, it's hard enough to actually withstand vigorous brushing like this without dinting or warping. So go around the edges a bit too. Your paint will always dry slightly darker, so don't worry too much if you feel like it's getting too light. And being a foam base with such deep detail, if need be, you can always, if you don't like what you've done, paint it black and go again. All right, and that's that done. Now what we'll do is let this completely dry, and then we'll go with just a lighter coat. Now you can build this up with as many coats and as many layers as you like. I'm going to keep this simple. I'm going to just done the black. Now I've done a mixed black and grey. Next one I'm just going to do just grey. Now the next coat is going to be a lot lighter, and I'm going to put on a lot less paint. Okay, so to do that, you just wipe more off of your brush before you start applying it. All right, so we'll let that go and then come back to it once it's dry. All right, so all of the dry brushing on the Guyver base is currently dry. Now what we're going to do is just go along with the next coat. Just going to go slightly lighter again. All we need to do for this one is we're just going to use just the acrylic grey we were using before. This time I'm not going to add any black to it to darken it. And we're going to do an even lighter dry brush. So to make sure your brush is nice and flexible to start with. If the bristles are too stiff when you go to start this, you're going to have the problem that all your paint's just going to hit one point, snag, and then not spread. So just dab the tip in lightly, get all the excess off, and we'll just start. Nice light brush strokes. Now, you're not really going to see where this is initially until you've gone over a little bit. The whole point about doing it this way is the small subtle differences. Now, if you accidentally put a little bit too much on, do not worry. You may need to go over and do this several times, because once it dries, you may feel like it's not quite enough. So you might want to go back and hit some other areas and things. Now, the first coat we did with the grey mixed with the black, we were very, very liberal with the application of that. This time we're going a lot less. And then if need be, after this, if you still want to pick out more detail, you can just use an even lighter shade. Just mix a bit of white with the grey. And a bit of white with the grey, just very, very lightly on. Just pick up any raised edges. Right, let's just hit the edge a little bit. What we're doing now is just applying it so lightly that it should just be a very subtle highlight. If you accidentally put too much on in one area, do not worry. Just leave it there, keep going. Let it dry a little bit, and then come back with a pretty much completely paintless brush and just kind of spread it, feather the edges in a bit more. How light you make the stonework is up to you. You can just leave it a dark, dull grey if you want. You don't have to do this step. Yeah, I put too much on there intentionally. So I'm just going to move on to the next area. Give that just a few seconds, then come back. Hit it from a different angle. Take some off, move it around. Every time you get too much paint on your brush, just hit another area and move on with it. The main key with this technique is to do it quickly. Don't take too much time. If you have any problems and you're worried that you've done it too wrong, don't. There's really no real way to mess this up. If you have some parts that are lighter than others, that's fine. It's just like having lighting hitting from a different key point. Just be consistent. Try not to miss any areas. Even a small amount of highlighting in one area compared to an area that's completely ignored will be obvious. Now I'm not going to brush the entire top, but I am going to make sure I put a rough hit of it in at least every sort of section of it. I'm not going to go nuts though, because once the figure's in place above this, it will cast a shadow. I'm trying to catch some of the edges. benefit about this technique is it dries extremely quickly. So you don't have to wait long to go over the next part or to see how it's going to look. Any parts you feel were neglected, just keep hitting them over and over. Any edges you feel should have caught a bit more highlight, hit them a bit harder with it. Alright, so that's pretty good. You won't notice a whole lot of difference in this, but when you look at it closely, you will see differences in colour as it builds up here. Alright, I'm actually pretty happy with that. I'm probably not going to go too much more with this. I'm going to let that completely dry, have a good look around, and then pretty much call this one done. Now you can seal this if you want to, just using like a clear sealant, but I don't think that's going to be necessary for this. As this is just going to be a display board for a model, it's not going to be touched. It's just going to gather a little bit of light dust occasionally to dust it off. You know, most dusting cloths and things like that are fairly lightweight and easy going and won't really damage any sort of paintwork on here. So I'm just going to leave it at that. Alright, so we'll come back to this again in the future and we'll paint the Guyver. And you'll see the completely finished product. For now, that's what we have. So that's it on there. Again, the Guyver's still just removable because I haven't glued him in place. Just sliding the pegs in. Once I've got him completely painted, we'll go to put it. All I'm going to do is just put some glue down those holes. For that, I'll probably just use just a very basic sort of bonding glue. That there. Not quite a PVA, probably something a little bit stickier, like just a basic modelling glue. But I wouldn't go as far as super glue, because super glue will just dissolve the foam inside. Just a basic model glue on here. Put it in, hold it in place. Okay, thanks for watching.